some work to do with my Jameses. So, 26 minutes, that's okay. I won't say it's a short chapter, but the chapter is kind of like one of those episodes on, network TV shows where, of course, you don't have an episode on demand, right? So every now and then they'll make an episode, which is just a recap episode, where the characters in the show will basically go over everything that's happened so far in the series so that people who are just tuning in don't have to rewatch all the previous episodes, can instead just jump in and start watching the show. That's kind of how I felt about this chapter. So it's not necessarily a short chapter, but there's only so many new points to go over. So, yeah, we can do this in 25 minutes. I only got one page of notes. I also have black ink again, so my notes are no longer magenta. So, that's cool. And I guess we'll just do the question. Well, first off, who read the chapter this week? That's pretty good. Who wants to go over what happened in the last chapter, briefly? Wow, tough crowd, huh? Miss Rhonda doesn't want to even?
Well, I might take too long.
Well, you don't need to give the theological interpretation. You can just say what happened. But no, go ahead. Say.
Well, the last chapter,
Yeah.
Kristen finally finds the scroll. He gets up to the area where he was warned about the lions. He almost turns back, and the porter tells him that it's okay to follow his direction. So he goes into meet the porter. The porter asks him, why is he there, and what is he looking for? And then he talks about the house and why it's called what it is. And he asks him a couple of questions, and then he has his daughter come out, and then she interrogates him to see whether or not, as a pilgrim going through this, they're going to let him spend the night or not.
Yeah. And again, I think the whole calling the women his daughters thing was an anachronism on my part. I just put that in there by mistake.
When I watched the movie with my family in Mexico, it was his daughter.
Oh, okay.
That was in the movies. I mean, it was a cartoon, but it was
Yeah.
listed as my daughters.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. And what was the name of the first woman who talks with him?
Yes, the first daughter was called Discretion.
Right, and that, of course, represents what for the church? What was the idea?
Well, we must hold ourselves accountable if we're going to be of the church and in the church.
Right. Yeah. There we go. Thank you, Hope. Yeah, and that entire idea is that you do want of course, as the church, you want as many people in as possible. You want to grow the flock of God as much as you can, but you do have to be on the lookout for people who are really out there to lead people astray. And I'm not talking about people who are wrong on a couple doctrinal issues or people who have a lot to learn, because that was me when I came into this church. But we'll get into it in a little bit. People who actively resist instruction, people who lead people away from the church. These are the people we got to be on the lookout for, right? So we'll get into it. Now, of course, what happens in this chapter?
The three other daughters, they take their turns, and each one questioning him, and it's basically a recap of him giving synonymous of where he started and how he got where he is.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I liked about it too is that whenever they asked about his family, you could see how brokenhearted he was, that they chose not to come with him and he had to leave them behind.
Right. Yeah, and what are the names of the three women in this chapter?
Heidi,
All right. And, I was thinking about this last week. Was wondering if there would be if the Sunday school lesson, we'd be going away from the chapter and doing something topical for Mother's Day for the Sunday school lesson. But then I was like, wait a minute. This chapter is basically the first time in the book since, other than discretion, since the very beginning where Christian's wife is mentioned, where there are female characters. So there you go. It's basically, it's a lesson with one male character and 4 female characters, so basically it's a Mother's Day lesson. There you go, good enough. Now, I thought it was funny how the timing kind of lined up on that. Yeah, so chapter 15 introduces, well, I guess 14 introduced, but chapter 15 goes into these 3 other women in the house beautiful. Piety, prudence, and charity, and, these 3 words, obviously they're meant to represent something. What is piety? Who can tell me what piety is? It's nothing to do with like a delicious apple pie, Anybody know what that means? You see that word, you want to look it up as you're reading through it, and Hannah.
It's like being super pious. You live very simply. You think very purely. You don't want for things. You're just as godly on this planet as you can be.
Yeah. The study guide has loyal devotion, I guess specifically in the context of loyal devotion to God, as the definition for piety, so I'd say that lines up pretty well. What about prudence? What is prudence?
Being careful with what you have.
Right? The ability to exercise reason and wisdom as you're going through your life. That's good. And, of course, charity. Right? Of course, this, was it 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, which in our King James Bible, the word charity is used, whereas in other translations, let's just leave it at that, whereas in other translations, it just says love, but the fact that in our Bible it's charity means something in particular, because we're not condensing 3 or 4 words for love down into one. The word charity is something bigger than just general love. It's Christian love. It's love in action, and it's a selfless thing, right? So that's the 3 women. And one thing I notice is that up until now, you have all these male characters, and I don't know if this is something John Bunyan was intending to, a way he had intended to write it, but it seems to be something. All the male characters seem to represent specific types of people. Formalist is a specific type of person who justifies his claim to salvation by saying, oh, I'm a member of the church. Or way back at the beginning, pliable is the type of person who's real wishy-washy. He goes with the flow and really believes nothing, and so he'll believe anything. But here, when it comes to these 4 women, discretion, piety, prudence, charity, instead of representing particular types of people, they represent specific virtues or duties that all believers, all Christians, are supposed to exercise. So I thought that was maybe interesting how Bunyan is using male characters and female characters differently in terms of using his story to teach. So piety, piety, the quality of being pious. I appreciate that definition. I'm being a little sarcastic there, I apologize. But no, loyal devotion to God and not wanting, not desiring a bunch of stuff. Prudence, exercising wisdom and reason, and then charity, which is Christian love. Would anyone say that there's any point in a Christian's life where you should not be exercising all 3 of these things? I would not say there is. The study guide notes in this chapter that biblical knowledge and doctrine are only dealt with in a superficial manner during this conversation, With discretion's job already done, sorting out those who are really just coming in to lead the sheep astray, nobody's here trying to test Christian to make sure he lines up 100% with them. Nobody's drilling him. Okay, if you don't get a 90% on the theology test, you got to get out. We don't trust you. That's not what's going on here. It's I don't want to call it a more casual conversation, but it's a more personal conversation. And so what I'll do is, I got a couple verses to go over, and we shouldn't be too long on it. We'll just go over the three conversations that happen. So, Ms. Sue, I'll have her turn to Titus 3, verses 10 and 11. Hope, Hebrews 11, 15 and 16. Pastor, Genesis 19, 24 through 26. David, Luke 17, 32. Miss Rhonda, Romans 7, 14, 15, and then 23. I will repeat that when I get back to you. And Miss Gaby, Ezekiel 3:19. So, just to emphasize the point I made at the beginning, because I know when we go through topics like this, or maybe if I was going through Jude or Titus, where it talks about false teachers, and it can be kind of easy to want to be like a really vicious guard dog about this. Like really, well, he believes slightly different about something like this or that. We got to be zealous. We can't, and maybe this is just a me thing, because I can be kind of argumentative and stubborn. And if I have an opinion, I want to kind of compete and demonstrate that my opinion is correct. And not saying that that's a good thing, that's just kind of how I am. And so small differences in doctrine, how do you handle this? How do you handle somebody who just needs to learn, who just needs to be instructed, versus somebody who is a wolf in sheep's clothing, trying to take people out of the flock, trying to hurt the flock? And I think the answer to that right there is in Titus 3, 10 and 11. Ms. Sue.
A man that is an heretic after the first and second admonition reject, knowing that he that is such is subverted and sinneth, being condemned of himself.
All right, and so based on those verses, what would you say is the way that we can determine the difference between these people? How do we tell these people apart? I'd say it's in the first verse there.
Apart from what?
A heretic, somebody who's here to hurt the church, to hurt the flock, to draw people astray, versus somebody who is wrong about something.
Oh, it depends on the admonition. I mean, if
Yes.
preachers go and explain to this person that is not correct, and they continue to do it, that's an heretic.
There you go. And that's what I wanted to make this point, because I feel like I talk about this false teachers thing a lot. And I don't want anyone to get the idea that we got to be giving people doctrinal tests at the door. But rather it's people's heart posture, their responsiveness to instruction, responsiveness to teaching, that you would use to determine what kind of person this really is. And of course, discretion's job was just that. And now that Christian has been determined to be the kind of person who is responsive, who is truly a member of God's flock, he's invited on in. And so we've got these three conversations. He chats with piety, he chats with prudence, and he chats with charity. What's the topic of a conversation that piety goes over with him? What would you say, summarize that conversation? What's the topic? What does she talk about with Christian?
Well, I see that she wants him to tell her why he needs to be there and why he's come.
Right, so she's going over his journey. Where's he come from? Where's he going? What's his motivation? How on earth did you make your way out of that city of destruction that you lived in. And so I don't have like a super deep point to make with this discussion other than, there are people in every church, in every congregation with very different backgrounds. And many came to the faith very different ways. Some people as children, some as adults, some through reading and understanding, others through suffering great hardship and having no one else to call on other than the name of Jesus. And I don't know, maybe there's something about that that's just good to know where other people come from, see what you can learn from them. Does anybody have any ideas or any commentary on this conversation? Why would piety be, because Discretion's already asked him his life story, why would the pious person, why would it be an exercise of piety? This is an open question, no wrong answers. I mean, there could be wrong answers, but I'm not looking for a particular answer. Why is this such an important topic of conversation to go in such detail on?
That way she can get to know him better and understand how he feels.
Mm-hmm. Anybody got anything else? Or?
Because going on a journey alone and searching by yourself, you don't have any guides at first.
Yeah.
And then slowly, as with him, he was introduced to guides that helped him along the way, which we have that too once we have the Holy Spirit.
Right. Hope you were going to say something. No? All right. Yeah. And maybe there's just a point to be made there that in order to help people with, the rest of their journey as a Christian, the rest of their walk, it would help to know where they've came from. So you know what their struggles are. You know what afflictions are going to be persistent in the rest of their lives. And on that that's a segue into the next conversation. He's chatting with this one woman, Prudence. And what's her topic of conversation? What does she really try to get down to the bottom of with him? What does she ask him about? His past. There's kind of a big theme here in terms of his presence.
And then, of course, she asked him, basically, is he homesick?
I say that's...
But if she asked him, she wants to know about his country that he came from. And then she leads into, almost questions like, which he does have some sadness because of what he had to leave behind.
I think hold on to that thought, because that's charity coming up. Red, were you going to say something? No. Salvation? There you go. Now you're getting on to what I was talking about. In particular, and I'll flip to the chapter just so I can read it. Prudence, exercising wisdom and how did I define this? Exercising reason and wisdom, kind of doing those things, which are prudent, those things which are important and useful and needful. She makes a point to ask him, kind of in detail, about sin. Particularly, she says, do you not yet bear away with you some of the things that then you were conversant with all? That's not a good paragraph to make the point because it's kind of hard to read. How about this one? Do you not find sometimes as if those things were vanquished, which at other times... I really need to find a better paragraph for this. How about this? Do you not think sometimes of the country from whence you came? And she goes on to it, talking about, aren't you still carrying some of those struggles, some of those difficulties that you were totally encumbered with back when you were buddy-buddy with all the people of the city of destruction, before you were saved? Aren't you still dealing with some of those things? Because, the pack has fallen off his back, but he still has some problems. He fell asleep at the wheel, lost his scroll. And, I see in this a very clear conversation about, still struggling with sin. Christian mentions that if he were mindful, which is, thinking too much, keeping it too much in mind about the country he came from, he might have had the opportunity to return. What do you think this means? What do you think the point he's trying to make is?
If you're not careful, you can turn back and do things that you know that you shouldn't.
Yeah. Pulled up some verses here. Hebrews 11, 15, 16.
And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is, an heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city.
And you see, this is kind of a word for word almost with what Christian says in the book. He says, yeah, but with much shame and detestation, truly, if I had been mindful of that country from whence I came out, I might have had opportunity to have returned. But now I desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. And you can kind of see the point that, like Pliable, way back in the beginning, on the way to salvation, but starts thinking about how much easier life was back at home, he turns back to that country and leaves the trail. And we can kind of speculate on what his fate is if he's going right back to the city of destruction, and what we've talked about with the man in the iron cage in Hebrews 6. Well, he got a taste of it. He turns back. The only way that he's getting back on the path at this point is by a miracle. None of you are convincing him. And we won't go too deep into that because maybe I made a point there that wasn't meant to be made, but that's kind of how I see it. I want to give another example of this kind of being mindful of where you came from in Genesis 19, 24 through 26. Pastor.
Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt.
And while we're at it, David, I give you Luke 17:32.
Remember Lot's wife.
That verse, it's a very short verse. It's almost tied with Jesus wept. But it really is, I don't know, maybe we should be taking it more seriously, because it is a pretty dire warning. Because what did Lot's wife do on the way away from destruction? She looked back. And what was the end of that? Right? She was turned to stone. On the way.
So Nate, the looking back, a lot of times we just say, oh, we're looking back. What it is the longing
Yes.
behind the look.
Yeah.
Right? It's that, oh, I have my whole life there. It's all of that.
Right. I remember Max Alderman was here one time, and he gave an interpretation of that I didn't quite jive with. He said that, well, she looked back because she was longing after her children-in-law that stuck behind, because she as a mother just couldn't help herself. I don't think that's the case, though. I think she was longing after that life. I think she was longing after that sin which she was living in. Yeah. And of course, we as saved people do this all the time. Dipping your toes back into sin is a common occurrence for even the most devout Christians. We see this in Romans 7, 14, 15, and 23. Miss Rhonda.
For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that do I. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity
Right, so there's a lot going on in that verse right there. That which I do, that which I, particularly 15, that which I do, I allow not, for what I would, that I do not. But what I hate, that I do, right? So, I do the things I would rather forbid myself from doing, which is sin. Those things that I would rather do, I don't do, which is obedience to God. But what I hate, that I do, which is sin. And so Paul, of course, you think of him as one of the biggest named Christians out there, is talking about how on a daily basis he is still dealing with this, that he just does by nature, by the law of sin which is in his members, that he does still struggle with temptation. Now, if you were a Methodist, you would say that the path to salvation is a path to sinless perfection. I think that's Methodism. Don't quote me on that. But that, in this life, you can achieve sinless perfection, and then that is salvation. And that's just not the case. That's just not what the Scripture says. What four things, Christian mentions it in the chapter, what four things help him resist temptation to sin? The scroll. Thinking about where he's going.
And he mentions too that what he saw hanging on the cross, of course, was Jesus, and he looks forward to seeing Jesus in heaven.
Right. So the cross, and he mentions that, he mentions in the chapter that he saw what he saw in his mind, because we talked about how when he was at the cross, there was no body there, because Jesus is victorious. But in his mind, he saw and understood, right?
He even saw the blood in his mind.
Right. So the cross, the scroll, his destination, and then the coat, right? I was in St. Augustine all day yesterday because I was dropping my phone off to get repaired. And the repair was so extensive, I just was trying to find a way to keep busy. I went to Harbor Freight, I went to Walmart, I went to Chick-fil-A, I went to Hobby Lobby. I got a bunch of stuff yesterday. And finally got my phone. Now it's silver on the trim instead of black. And what I thought was so funny, the repair was so extensive. I thought it was just a screen repair, but they needed to do a lot more apparently. The repair was so extensive, I get my phone back and the lady says, it's basically a brand new phone. And I'm like, that coat, that new clothing, that new exterior that is put on to us by Christ basically makes us a brand new person, right? Even though we still got the same insides, and so we'll struggle with sin. I don't know, I just thought that was kind of a funny parallel. And we'll wrap up real quick with, so there's those four things, right? The coat, the cross, the destination, the scroll, which is the assurance of salvation. Those things help you refocus and keep you away from sin. And real quick, we'll wrap up with this last conversation with Charity. What Miss Rhonda touched on it. What about your loved ones? What about the people you left behind? And this one was kind of annoying for me, honestly, because she says, well, did you say? Yes, I said. Well, did you try? Yes, I tried. Did you, again and again, thing after thing, did you try saying this to them? Yes, and they didn't listen. It's kind of like me, at work, I call IT about something. Well, did you turn it off and on again? Yes. Did you, blah, blah, blah? Yes. If those things worked, I wouldn't be calling you. But the thing is, not everybody does those things, so they got to say them. Similarly, not everybody thinks to show love for the people they're witnessing to, or not everyone thinks to pray to God that their witness would be effective. So Charity touches on those things, and she gives them a comfort at the end of it. Your family, despite all you did everything you were supposed to, and your family didn't follow you. And in the last paragraph, she talks about this. Charity says, indeed, she comforts him, right? This Christian love, Charity. Indeed, Cain hated his brother because his own works were evil and his brother's righteous. And if thy wife and children have been offended with thee for this, they thereby show themselves to be implacable to good. Thou hast delivered thy soul from their blood. Miss Gaby, Ezekiel 3:19. Yep.
Yet if thou warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked ways, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul.
Right. And so the point that's made here is that if there is somebody who you've witnessed to, if you've done your job as a Christian, and they still haven't repented, if they still haven't realized their sin, but you've done your job, you don't bear the responsibility there. And so it's something not to stress about. Understand that God's will be done. Kind of like how Paul, was it at Corinth? He's talking with the Jews, and they keep rejecting, and he's basically, you know what, all right, your blood is on your own heads. I'm going to go to people who are actually going to listen. And, I don't know, just something to be said about responsibility and a comfort when it feels like we're not doing a good enough job. Well, if you're doing what the Bible said you ought to be doing in terms of a witness, right? We can plant, we can water, but God gives the increase. So, all right, I'm over time. Could have predicted that. Can I ask Brother Red to close in prayer for us?